But to start with, as ever on a Thursday afternoon, here's today's exciting episode of the Brollys.
Rainbows climb, clouds drift by, Brollys fly through a magic sky. Is this real? Are they dreams? Nothing appears to be what it seems. Then far away I can hear a voice in the weatherhouse call out a name. Mr. Brolly, it's time for the rain.
Harry was trying to go to sleep, but no sooner had he closed his eyes than he opened them again. Tucked up beside Harry in bed were his toys, Elephant and Hippo. Snake, as always, lay on the rug by the door, and Bird was perched on the chest of drawers. Harry stared down at his patchwork quilt. It was different from other quilts. Instead of flowery scraps of material, it was made of little embroidered pictures of rainbows, stars and planets, clouds, and great flashes of lightning in a dark and stormy sky. It had been made a long, long time ago. On the wall hung Harry's weatherhouse. If the day was going to be fine and sunny, Mrs. Brolly came to her door. If the day was going to be wet and cloudy, Mr. Brolly came out. But of course, they never came out together, for it is impossible for a day to be both wet and dry at the same time. But what would happen if they both came out together? Wondered Harry, and he sat up and stared at the weatherhouse. As he stared, the doors seemed to grow larger. His bed grew smaller, and he found himself at the entrance of the weatherhouse. A light was shining from the door, through which Harry could see Mr. Brolly no longer fixed to his wooden stand, but moving freely about the room. Harry was almost asleep when a great gust of wind came through his bedroom window and blew him into the weatherhouse. "There you are, my boy," said Mr. Brolly. "I thought that a good puff of wind would bring you. Why, I do believe that it's the only way to get anywhere at all. Get a good stiff breeze at your back, and off you go with a song in your heart and your hat blown off." Harry, who was drifting round the room, smiled to think of everyone going about in this manner. "But my boy," said Mr. Brolly, "think of the convenience. Think of the exhilaration. One could get oneself blown to China, if one wished, or to the top of Kilimanjaro." Harry came down by Mr. Brolly's computer screen. The pictures looked inviting, and he was just wondering if he preferred to go to China or to Kilimanjaro when the door opened and in marched Mrs. Brolly. "Brolly," she said, "I have never heard such rubbish. Imagine blowing this innocent child to the top of one of the highest mountains in the world. The only thing a wind is good for is flying a kite. You may, with my permission, conjure up a nice little wind, suitable for flying a kite." With that, she took hold of Harry's hand and led him through the kitchen and out into the garden, where the animals sat enjoying the sun. "But I haven't brought my kite," said Harry. Mrs. Brolly said nothing to this, but delved into her bag and brought out a big kite, which she handed to Harry. Then she opened her umbrella and rose in the air. "Quick, open your brolly and off we go," she said. "But what about the animals?" said Harry. "I don't want to leave them behind." "Then you must keep in touch," said Mrs. Brolly. So Harry opened the duck's head umbrella and grabbed hold of Hippo's ear. To his surprise, the great animal rose from the path as lightly as if she were a balloon. Elephant took hold of her tail with his trunk, and the snake held on to Elephant's tail, and so they all went, as effortlessly as if in a dream, with a little bird flying by their side. "Where are we going?" shouted Harry. "You'll see," said Mrs. Brolly, and suddenly, there below them, was a park with high railings and a gate. It was the ideal place for flying a kite. Great lawns lay on either side, and there were small hills just the right size for running up and getting a kite into the air. In the distance was a small bandstand. Mrs. Brolly sat down on a bench and began to stitch her patchwork quilt. Harry looked round. It was all very beautiful, he thought, but there was something not quite right. Hippo and Elephant were beginning to yawn, while the little bird and snake were already fast asleep on the branch of a tree. "Mrs. Brolly," said Harry, "what's wrong with the park?" But Mrs. Brolly just went on sewing. "Children should sometimes find things out for themselves," she said, and she didn't even look up. So Harry set off down the path, and he had not gone far when he realized that nothing in the park was moving. Not even a blade of grass was stirring. Then he turned a bend in the path and saw before him 3 small children, each child clutching a brightly coloured kite. "We want to fly our kite, but there's no wind." "I'm sorry," said Harry. "There's nothing I can do." But the children just gazed at him, as though there was something he could do. Harry began to whistle, as he had heard of whistling up a wind, but nothing at all happened, and his whistle sounded very thin and piping in the still, quiet park. By and by, he came back to where Mrs. Brolly sat sewing, and where the animals lay sleeping in the grass. "Mrs. Brolly," said Harry, "there's no wind, and the children can't fly their kites." "Well, it's all Brolly's fault," said Mrs. Brolly. "He's sulking again. If he can't have a high wind, he'll have no wind at all. That's Brolly all over." As she spoke, Harry saw Mr. Brolly coming down the path towards them, smiling the pleased and happy smile of someone who knows that they have been right all along. "You see, my dear," he said, "where there is no wind, there is no movement, no hustle and bustle, no coming and going, no be quiet," said Mrs. Brolly, "and make a wind at once. How dare you deprive these children of a day's fun?" "Very well," said Mr. Brolly, "but you do understand that what will move a kite will move other things as well." "Oh, get on with it," said Mrs. Brolly. So Mr. Brolly began to whistle. The blades of grass began to stir, the leaves of the trees began to rustle, and the children smiled as their kites rose into the air. Hippo and Elephant awoke. The little bird flew round in circles, and Snake woke up and fell out of the tree. In the bandstand, the band began to play, and altogether the park became alive with movement and joyful sound. "Isn't it wonderful?" said Mr. Brolly. "And it's all because of my old friend, the wind. Old Puff and Blow, I call him. Old Blow all before me. Old Brolly, Brolly," said Mrs. Brolly in a warning voice. But it was too late. The wind blew stronger and stronger, and up went the children, holding tight to the strings of their kites. Hippo and Elephant, too, were swept up by the strong gusts, and they flew past looking surprised, but rather pleased. "It's especially nice for a large animal to fly," said Mr. Brolly. "They are usually so firmly fixed on the ground, you see." Then he began to whistle more loudly, and the wind snatched the instruments from the bandsman's hands, and over the treetops they went, gleaming and playing a strange music all of their own. The bandsmen followed their instruments, each man holding on to his hat and to the boot of the man in front. Snake flew behind them, as straight as an arrow. "Isn't it wonderful?" cried Mr. Brolly. "Happiness, excitement, and all because of the wind." And indeed, everyone and everything in the park was tossing and swirling about in the gusts of wind, except for Mrs. Brolly. She, strangely enough, sat quite still on the bench and continued to stitch away at her patchwork quilt. "This wind wouldn't move her," said Mr. Brolly. "But there are different kinds of wind, dear boy. There's one that goes round and takes everything with it, even houses. Shall we try it?" "No," said Harry. "I don't think that people would like their houses to be blown round and round." "Don't you?" said Mr. Brolly. "I thought they might find it rather delightful, like living on a merry-go-round." "Mr. Brolly," said Harry, "stop the wind and put everything back where it was. It isn't fun anymore." "But my boy," said Mr. Brolly, "nothing can ever be put back exactly the way it was, you know. Once things have been stirred, they are never quite the same again." He seemed quite happy, until Mrs. Brolly rose up by his side and fixed him with a stern eye. "Brolly," she said, "stop this immediately." And at once the wind began to die down, little by little, until it was nothing more than a warm summer breeze. Gently, everyone and everything came down to earth. The bandsmen landed in a heap on the grass, and their instruments followed shortly afterwards, sighing and playing a little snatch of march or waltz. Hippo came down in the ornamental pond, where she felt quite at home, and where she astonished a water boatman. For a whole year he had skimmed back and forth across the pond, and now, suddenly before him was a large island. Elephant came down on top of the bandstand and fell through the roof. The children smiled happily. It was the most exciting day that they had ever known. For why, it is wonderful to fly your kite. It is even more wonderful to fly with it. "What are their names, Mrs. Brolly?" But Mrs. Brolly had packed the quilt away in her bag, and already she was floating up and away, holding on to the handle of her umbrella. "They don't have names," she said as she went. "They're not real. They're just a dream." "They aren't a dream," cried Harry. "They're real children, just like me." "Of course they are," said Mr. Brolly, appearing at Harry's side. But when Harry turned his head to look at the park, it didn't seem real at all, and like a painting where the colours have faded or run into one another. The children were nowhere to be seen. "Come back," he shouted. "We haven't had our picnic yet." And with that, he awoke and found himself sitting up in bed beneath his patchwork quilt. The animals had become toys again, but the wind was still blowing the curtains at his window. "I'm going to fly my kite today, Mrs. Brolly," he said. But Mrs. Brolly just stood at the door of the weatherhouse, a small, still figure, made of wood.